Well, what we've got to do is get more councils. So we've got Darebin in Melbourne. A couple of things. Well, Darebin's rolling out its response, so that's an ongoing process, and we're getting there. But we need to start getting other councils to do the same, because once that communication starts pumping out from Darebin, once we start seeing the conversation with the community, once the community, we start reaching out to the ethnic groups, the churches, etc., through the council, through the newsletters, through the website, through volunteers working hand in hand with council from the community to get a combined approach, I think the climate emergency message will be unstoppable.
No, definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. You can just see the excitement in your eyes, Adrian. I'm looking through, peering through here, and it is. And I think we've got to say, City of Greater Geelong, when is it going to happen here?
Yeah, exactly. Like Geelong, Surf Coast, etc., etc. Yeah, and we've got Banyule, the Transition Town movement in Banyule is taking this head on. Already got their first motion through council. It's not a climate emergency declaration, but it's an acknowledgement that some people think there's a climate emergency.
Yeah,
so,
it's not we've got to be clear here. It's not just a matter of declaring. What follows after that?
Yeah, what follows? So what a council can do. Now, councils will not have the money to roll out a climate emergency response, right, in Australia, in the Australian context anyway. So what the councils can do, they can pick a few intelligent, iconic projects, such as Darebin has a Solar Saver project. They borrow $20 million. That money is basically loaned to poorer members of the community, low-income families, etc. They buy solar panels. They save money. Some of the money they save gets paid back through rates. It creates a rolling fund. For example, that's an excellent thing, as well as energy efficiency, that sort of stuff, community gardens, all sorts of things you could do, right? So we need a number of iconic projects to say, here's some things we're actually doing. We need to educate the public, and we need to get the public fired up and involved and demanding action from state and federal governments to fork up with the money that we actually need to do this
And there's no trouble finding informed volunteers to do that, to help, to go hand in hand. In fact, they'd be leading a lot of the councils.
Yeah, and look, and a lot of councils have got programs that fit right into a climate emergency response. It's a question of scale, speed, and urgency, really. Yeah. So it's about bringing those, at least creating the opportunity for those programs to come up. But in particular, what we want is messaging. We want the council. Just like our council acknowledges their support for refugees, we want our council to acknowledge that we're in a climate emergency. Public banners, signs on the entry to the council, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And if more and more councils do it, then we create a critical mass. And then it starts getting ridiculously embarrassing for state and federal politicians.
Yeah. The state government can't rely on the feds being so slack, as they're standing up there saying, look at us, when they're not acting as if it's a climate emergency themselves.
True. And they're using the complete failure of the federal government's response to justify an inadequate response on their behalf. Yeah. So which is not, when we get back down to it, is what do we want to do? Like, really, at the moment, it is an emergency, and we want to save our children's future. That's what it's down to. And people, when politicians look back, whatever excuse they think they have had for not acting, whatever debt they owed, or whose money was in their pocket, whichever faction they had an allegiance to, they will look back and it will seem trivial and pathetic, and they will not forgive themselves when they look back on this time now. Because we are now past the time that you can deny that it's a climate emergency. It's just beyond that time.
And more than a climate emergency, it's a climate crime.
Yeah, it is a climate crime. I regularly do little memes that say another crime against humanity, and that's because ecocide. It's ecocide. So I mean, you cannot undertake an action that is more detrimental than attacking your own planetary sustainable ecological systems that support our humanity and everything else that goes along with
the biosphere. The
biosphere, exactly. You cannot commit a worse crime.
And the fact that is what's called a global commons, which means that everybody has a right, in a way, to have clean air, clean water, and the kind of things. And the worst part of climate change is that where it really hits hard is in the poorest areas of the world. It's in Africa, in Bangladesh, and places where millions of people are vulnerable.
Yes. And it's only because Japan, for instance, is a relatively wealthy country that they can actually respond to the huge flooding event in the way that they did. Now, if that was in another country, there would be tens of thousands of people probably dead or dead soon from that event. So, whereas Japan has the resources. But at some point, if we let this go on, our ability to respond, our surplus capital, our actual physical resources to respond get worn down and less and less. So, and we all go down with it.
Yeah, there is a line, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think it's like Russian roulette, but there's bullets in every chamber. That's what's really happening. I guess that our decision makers are saying, well, it hasn't happened yet here, so let's just
sell some more coal.
But the thing is, it has. Like the Queensland floods, I think were $26 billion in costs. Now, if you can tackle this as an economic rationalist and just say, if you put the price of global warming onto the price of coal, fossil fuels, steak, lamb, and dairy, the other big ones, forestry, deforestation, the whole lot, you put that price onto those products. Guess what becomes cheaper?
Yeah.
On standard economics, it's the renewables that stand out. It's you no longer eat steak. It's simple as that. You put the price on, and that's where we know it's a scam because they don't. And it's about protecting corporate interests that have got control of our political interests.
We must be at some sort of a tipping point because, if you look at the polls that I mentioned earlier, where 8 out of 10 Australians are saying that they want to take action on this, why don't we then vote accordingly? That's the last thing missing, that we're not voting for instance, your party.
Yeah, well, look, one is a simple matter of resources for us, so we're a self-funded volunteer-based organisation and we can't compete with the, sort of 200 to 300,000 that the Greens would spend in our own seat, so we get swamped. But the other reality is that people, I think there's there's the hard denial of the coal industry and those sort of lobbies, and there's what Bryony Edwards, my partner and Case Save the Planet campaigner, describes as the general response of the environment movement and the progressive NGO movement, where they talk about climate change, but they don't talk about the emergency. They don't talk about the scale and urgency of the reactions that they want. Some of them still have targets around 2050. It's literally suicidal. It's suicide for their objectives that they stand up for, whether it's the environment or people or refugees or whatever. And so it's not being honest to their own organisation, and it's dishonest for everyone else, including their children. So why they maintain this? And I think there's just this, I think people are pretty tribal, and we just haven't. People have just got to break out of this self-delusion that is occurring around global warming.
And the first step to do that, I think, is to know that you are definitely